channel is live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I am Christiana Ellis,
I'm Mike Mateen.
and tonight we're continuing our 2024 Oscar movie marathon by discussing more of the movies that we have now both seen. We've both been trying to see as many of the nominated movies as we can. And last time we discussed a whole bunch of the Best Picture nominees. This year, or this update, we have a more eclectic mix of movies. But as always, we're going to be deep diving and doing spoilery discussions for a handful of movies. Those movies tonight will be Elemental, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, Naiad, and Society of the Snow. So, you have been warned. But I hope that's a good thing because that you'll like it and so on. Here we go. So, how has your marathon been going?
Um, Different than expected. Just I still had the plan that I did to watch, movies and
Mm-hmm.
where I didn't have to commit to the whole time. One of the things though, just a lot of things just have come up and been doing a lot of things that like don't even leave me time to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And just with everything that's going on, one of the things that I decided to do was pick movies that I wanted to watch,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily what would get me the most um,
Right.
clout or whatever in the thing.
Well,
So,
yeah,
so
the
yeah,
percentage, right?
right. My percentage. So literally, and since we've last talked,
Mm-hmm.
like I've watched 4 or 5 movies. If I had chosen to watch the 4 or 5 movies that had the most nominations, I'd
Mm-hmm.
be in the 60s or 70s. But because I chose movies that had one, maybe two nominations because they were the ones I wanted to watch, so I still like kind of am doing it. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with that because I got to watch some things that were really interesting. Not to say that the movies with all the big nominations
Mm-hmm.
aren't going to be interesting when I get to them, but I was looking for just some more eclectic type stuff. Like just
Sure.
that's where I'm at right now. And then also, so I'm kind of on two extremes, right? So I have like I watch the Mission Impossible, Indiana Jones, like fun, and then the Naiad, the
Society
Society
of the Snow.
Snow, yeah, things that are a little bit, like I said, a little bit more eclectic
Mm-hmm.
taste, but I have just been enjoying the process. So
Well,
even though
good.
my percentage didn't go up significantly, I did watch some good movies, which is the point, and I enjoyed them, and I enjoyed my time that was spent doing it. So
Awesome. So, as we had previously discussed on earlier updates, I kind of ended up having seen a lot of the Best Picture nominees and the most nominated movies I'd kind of seen before the nominations even came out. And so it's also been true for me that a lot of the movies that I've been watching for the marathon are the movies that have just maybe one or two nominations to them, and I think that's kind of neat. It's been interesting. For example, one thing we've observed in previous years is that movies where the Best Actress nominations come from often end up being smaller, less nominated movies, and we don't. It's sometimes a little harder to get through all of those, but you know. This year I've seen them all. You've managed to see 3 out of 5. So
I
it's
know.
like, yeah. But yeah, it's okay. So I think there's been a lot of good movies to watch, but let's go ahead and get started with them. Is there any of them that you want to just jump right into? Otherwise, we could do them in alphabetical order or something to that effect.
Oh, I mean, I usually we just kind of go down the categories,
Sure, that
right?
works. So probably the first one in that sense then would be Elemental, which is
Yep.
nominated for Best Animated Feature.
Yes. Um, it's been a while since I've watched this, so to actually discuss the intricacies of the plot
Mm-hmm.
might be a little bit more difficult, but I do remember enjoying it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I felt like it. I don't remember it feeling either cheesy or preachy with its sort of xenophobia, like being different,
Mm-hmm.
like not in message that it's obviously trying to get because all the elements, they live in different places.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I just remember it being really fun. So I don't know if maybe you remember more that can kind of kickstart my memory, but
Sure,
yeah.
sure. Well, so I watched. It's been a little while for me too, because I watched it back when it was originally in the theater. Um, and so this is Pixar's latest, as you were mentioning. It's the 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 metaphor being used here is that you've got fire people and earth people and water people and air people, and they all live in one big city, but they live
Right.
like separate neighborhoods. And um, I think in some respects, it's a little bit like Zootopia again, by way of a different metaphor in some respects. Like the plot's different, but you
Yeah.
still got the assimilation stories and some of the like elements of xenophobia, but also just culture clash. But then, mixed in with that, you've got a romance and you've got a young woman trying to figure out how to tell her parents that she doesn't want to just follow in their footsteps. Although half of her plot is actually even realizing that that's true. Like she hasn't even really realized that herself through a big chunk of the movie. Um, I I thought this movie, like the animation and all of like the world design, just visually is beautiful. And I thought that a lot of the just emotional plot beats of the story, just like the characterization and like, some of those themes, I think hit really well. But boy, just the metaphor just does not work for me. It just breaks down in so many different places in a way that I really had trouble with. Like I still like it. I didn't dislike the movie, but boy, I just was frustrated with many elements of it. Like
I
so
could see
many,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
so many plot points seem to hinge on them not understanding how their own bodies work. Like for example, the
I don't remember.
question, there's a big tension for 2 acts of the movie of, can the water person and the fire person even touch without hurting each other? And that is presented as something unknown and scary until they finally touch, and it's fine, I guess, for reasons that are unclear, because previously water people have touched fire people and it wasn't fine. So love makes it fine, I guess. But they had to discover this by trying it because they didn't know. Like that seems strange. And there's a whole bit of like a water person not realizing that he can evaporate and then come back and be okay again. Like, wouldn't they know these things?
That one I do remember. That one, yes.
um so
But
yeah, stuff like that just kind of, usually I'm a person that is not determined to try to extend the metaphor beyond what we see in the actual presented story. Like, for example, I really like Zootopia. It is nonetheless a movie where if you try to extend the metaphor they're using of the predators and prey and all of that sort of thing, if you try to extend it any further than the boundaries of the actual plot being told, it starts breaking down and going haywire almost immediately, right? Just in terms of like, well, okay, well, which predators are meant to be the marginalized group in this setting, but it's also coming from a place where historically they actually were the threat, and you start saying, well, wait a minute, what are you trying to say with that, right? But again, the movie isn't trying to say that. It's just like, you have to just sort of leave the metaphor within the boundaries that the story is telling. But this one, but Elemental has places right in the center of the plot where it doesn't make sense. And that bothered me. But it's pretty and it's sweet, and a lot of the character beats worked for me anyway, and it's funny. And I really, really liked the stuff about, I think Ember is the name of
Ember,
the female
Ember,
lead.
like a
Yeah,
fire ember.
right.
Yeah.
And so, like, early on, one of the uh, main sources of conflict for her is that her dad has created this shop that is, for Fire Nation people, the sorts of things they like that are harder for them to get when they live in this big city with all the other elements. And He's getting older now. He's, gets tired easier, and Ember seems eager to take over from him so that he can rest. But every time she tries to run the shop, she loses her temper and blows things out of proportion, and it's a whole big thing. Of course, they're playing with the metaphor of the fiery temper, right? Like that whole thing. But eventually, her big turning point is realizing, like, where is this impatience actually coming from? And her recognizing that maybe she has always just kind of assumed that taking over the shop was the only choice for her and never really even questioned it. But then, as soon as she even considers the possibility of doing anything else, suddenly it feels like she knows where that impatience and temper is coming from, is
Right.
that she doesn't want to do that. And I thought that whole part of the story was really interesting because she's feeling a genuine conflict between not wanting that for herself, but how to communicate that to her parents without it seeming like she is rejecting them or suggesting that they were doing something wrong by encouraging her to follow in their footsteps, right? Like all of that stuff I thought was great. And I kind of liked too, Wade is the water guy in this romance. I liked the whole thing of him being a little bit more of a like new agey, open and vulnerable with his emotions guy, and having that play into like the water element. Like I thought that stuff worked pretty well.
Yeah. Which it also leads into some of the things that like obviously like you were talking about is they're using like the fact that he evaporates, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's so devastating, but that she realized he's condensed in the ceiling, so
Mm-hmm.
plays to his emotions and gets him to play what they call the crying game, right? Which is where like you talk really nice about somebody so that they get
Mm-hmm.
they get like happy tears, and so he starts crying himself back to life or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's that's meant to be cute, like and showing that how they're like connecting.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. It's you would have thought he could figure out how to do that before,
Yeah.
like
Or
if
at
that was a
least
thing
be
that could
aware
happen to
that it's
them. Yeah.
possible. Like when they're
Right.
worried that he's evaporating, they're acting like he's dying. Both of them are acting like that's the threat.
Yes.
And so it's one thing for him to not be good or have it easily to do, but for him to not even be aware that it's possible seems strange.
But it would take away from the trauma of the
Yeah.
moment, which
Yeah.
leads to their first kiss now that they know they can touch.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and so the other relatively minor complaint I had about it was that the big conflict of the flood, right? And the dam and all of that stuff just feels so external to what the characters are dealing with, right? Like
That
other than it
I
be
agree with you way more.
yeah.
Like I agree with your other parts, but
Mhm.
that's the part now that you're saying it, I remember bothered me a little bit more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's obviously a dam breaking and causing a big flood in Firetown is an obvious threat, but it has nothing to do with the characters otherwise. And it doesn't really make any sense why these characters would be the only ones who can do anything about it. Like I'm trying to remember the details of like I think they probably try to tell someone, but it just like in a city like this, it just doesn't I don't really buy that these two people, one of whom actually works for the water department of the city, um, don't have that better under control. And if they wanted to have the movie be like about crumbling infrastructure or something, they could do that. But the movie's not really about that in any other way. It feels like just such an arbitrary, externally imposed threat for the characters to face. And all of the stuff of them having to deal with it just feels separate from the rest of the through lines of the movie. Like,
Yeah. And
how does that
to the
have anything to do with the assimilation story or the culture clash, right? It's just like a flood would be a threat to anybody except other water people. And even then it would be messy.
Yeah, and I think with the other part that like never quite hit, the beats never quite hit with me was it felt like there was going to be like a villain that was
Mm-hmm.
like causing this, like to
Yeah.
your point, not necessarily crumbling infrastructure, but maybe
Mm-hmm.
an external threat that's actually coming in and like trying to hurt the city,
Mm-hmm.
not just there's this thing that we threw the sandbags in front of, that didn't work, so we made some glass, that didn't work. Like to
Mm-hmm.
your point, they never told anybody, like, but
Yeah.
there wasn't, it felt like somebody like it felt like you, it, not that it shouldn't have been working, but like maybe somebody was actively working against them, and then
Mm-hmm.
it turns out that doesn't, that it never materializes. Like
Right.
there is no villain.
Like you could imagine some other version of the script where there maybe was someone in charge at the government who was deliberately saying they don't care about fixing that dam because they don't care about the fire people or something like that. But they
Or
just,
somebody who wanted to hurt the fire people and
right.
was actually like
Yeah.
going at night and like damaging the dam,
Yeah.
right?
And so maybe they didn't want to have that person in there. Okay, but that means that we're left with no antagonist at all except an incredibly impersonal dam that has no connection to the characters other than it's a obvious environmental threat.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember
So
that.
that's frustrating, and that, you know, that plus just the metaphor difficulties just felt, made me feel like they just were so in love with the idea of designing all of these different little world elements that they just like they didn't move on to some other story idea because they wanted so much to they wanted to make this one work so much. Which, ironically, one of the other movies that I watched for the marathon that we're not going to get into detail on here is The Creator, which is one of the more frustrating movies I've watched in a long time because the world building and the visual look of it and all of the effects and everything and the production design, a lot of that stuff is so good that it makes the story being so bad just infuriating. And the story just like, it's like how can a story be off target and on the nose at the same time? Somehow the creator finds a way. But yeah, so anyway, we're not talking about the creator, but just in the same way that the world building and the setting in some ways feels more interesting than the plot. Or even like if they had just been willing to have it be just a smaller story without having to have this whole dam breaking flooding plot line and literally just made it about the emotional arcs of the characters, I think that would have been better. But they just felt like they needed big danger.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I don't think they, I agree with you. I don't think they did. I think
Mm-hmm.
the just the threat of like not wanting to run the store and like that whole
Mm-hmm.
like there's enough there, I thought. But
Yeah.
yeah.
And I
Uh,
mean, because ultimately the big threat that's presented up right up until the last moment, like the reason that they end up in so much danger at the big, you know, the climax is not even that anyone's lives were necessarily in danger, in except that Ember risks her own life to save this little eternal flame thing that her parents brought over, right? Which there's no question that it would be sad for that to be extinguished by the flood, right? But she risks her life to save it, right? And then Wade ends up risking his own life to try to save her. And so, like, the stakes feel a little bit strange, right? Because certainly, yes, it makes sense you'd want to save the flame, but like at the same time, it's a little bit like the equivalent is do you run into a burning building for it, though?
right.
I mean, I think I think her parents say to her, the idea that we would lose you to save that is awful. So like they basically told her, it's like, you know, we care more about you than that. But in any case, so I think there's a lot to like about Elemental. It's not bad, but it has some issues. This was my take on it.
Yeah, and I think that I was trying to lead off like I said, so a movie I haven't watched in a very long time. I just remember kind of a pleasant feeling about it,
Yeah.
because it does leave you with a pleasant feeling. But now, as you kind of spurred my memory, and I'm remembering like the actual plot beats, yeah, I definitely agree with you that that it still is a pleasant movie.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
and
It's beautiful to look at, and even with some plot quibbles, I think a lot of the actual emotional moments work really well. And like I said, I really liked the stuff with just like the actual emotional stakes of the characters separate from the whole flood dam arc.
yes,
Yeah. So I think a lot of that stuff really works. It's just they felt like they needed to shoehorn in a big environmental disaster.
yep.
Mm.
Agreed.
All
So
right, cool. So, um, let's go ahead and move on then to the next movie going down our spreadsheet. The next one that would come up is Naiad, which is nominated for Best Actress for Annette Bening and also Best Supporting Actress for Jodie Foster. Which certainly those are the those are the two characters in this movie. I mean, there's some others, but like it's mostly those two and other people in it for a little bit. The ship captain, maybe.
oh yeah, he's really good.
Yeah.
Who's that? That's
Yeah, I can look it up.
Rise Ifans, I
Ah,
think is his.
yes, I believe that's right.
Yeah.
Um,
Who?
but so, do you want to introduce this one? Because you watched it before I did. I watched it because you watched it. I didn't even really know anything about it before watching it. So, you want to introduce it? Why'd you
Yeah.
pick
So
it?
this. Yeah, it's a biographical sports drama, I guess is the best way to put it. This is about a swimmer named Diana Nyad,
Yes, that's correct.
and she is, I guess, like a better. I mean, she's like a endurance swimmer, right? Like a people who swim the English Channel and all that kind of stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
she wants to be the first person to swim from Cuba to the U.S., which is an incredibly, while it's only 90 miles, it is an incredibly difficult swim because of the current and the way that everything's entering the Gulf right there, the threat from sharks, from jellyfish, from just the wildlife that's in that kind of that tropical,
Mm-hmm.
and not just the tropical waters, but the same thing with the currents. Like this is a part of the ocean that's very turbulent, which leads to a lot of different,
Mm-hmm.
kinds of wildlife. Like it's always been a thing. Like obviously,
Yeah.
I mean, you know this. Maybe some of
Well,
you know.
having watched the movie now, yeah.
Yeah, but even just like this is stuff I've known for a long
Oh
time.
yeah.
Like my family is from Cuba. My family immigrated from Cuba. They did not swim from Cuba, obviously. They flew, but
Mm-hmm.
um, it having known how this thing is, like even just the Cubans who would raft
Mm-hmm.
after like got more difficult to just get over here. Like it's a very difficult raft trip,
Mm-hmm.
much less a swim trip, right? And so it's a very interesting, you know, kind of like the way that it's kind of separated from like her first attempt
Mm-hmm.
to her kind of become going into like retirement. Like I think she's like in her 60s,
Right.
and
Yeah.
she gets this new resolve that she's going to accomplish the one thing that eluded her,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so she goes and she gets her best friend, her former partner, who is Bonnie, I
Bonnie.
think,
Yeah. Bonnie Stoll.
Bonnie Stoll, who's Annette Bening.
No. Annette Bening is Diana Nyad. Jodie
Oh,
Foster.
sorry,
Yeah. Yeah.
Jodie Foster.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you're right, Jodie Foster.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, um, Jodie Foster to train her, and their relationship is fun because like Jodie Foster is skeptical about like why she wants to do this, but she also is like it's her friend and she
Mm-hmm.
cares about her, and so she keep like there's this weird back and forth between like leaning in and like
Mm-hmm.
wanting to help her to like, hey, maybe do we need to be doing this? But
Mm-hmm.
like, but if we are and you're gonna be stubborn, like I'm gonna be there with you. Like
Yeah.
it's a really cool relationship. Like
Mm-hmm.
the way that they kind of bounce off each other and like, and she's just like, yeah, I mean, I'm guess all right, and it kind of progresses to like, all right, fine. like,
Hmm.
I guess we're just gonna do this, right? You know?
Right, right.
And
Yeah,
it,
I thought so I didn't know anything about the true story before putting this on. And so like I was literally introduced to the idea of it in the little opening where they kind of show archival footage of the real Diana Nyad when she was younger, doing her, she talking about like her previous marathon swimming, and then her first attempt, where she was going to be in this special like a ship with like a special cage out front where she can like be swimming but like inside the cage, and it was supposed to protect against sharks and stuff like that. But it was a failure of the currents at that time, right? Was that
yep.
first? Yeah. And so like she didn't make it, and then she decided that was too hard. I'm disappointed. I wanted to do it, but you know what? I decided I was going to try it once, and then it didn't work. So I'm going to retire from this. And she became like a sports commentator and wrote a lot about sports and so on. And like, so she had a successful career, like not marathon swimming. Um, but then, like as you say, I'm trying to remember what it was that actually triggers it again when she starts up again like when she's 60, right? And so maybe was that it, just her turning 60 that
Yeah,
like
I think it was just sort of like, yeah, like this sort of like not
oh
midlife
right, because
crisis.
we have her it's her birthday party, right? There was that
Right.
initial scene. um I also really liked the relationship between these two because like one of the things that's established very early on is that they Bonnie and Diana are both lesbian but not with each other. Like
Yes.
they kind of discuss this like, well, we tried for a little while but it was just not a thing. We're better as friends.
Yeah.
um, but so but yeah, what one of the things that I thought was really interesting about this movie, in addition to just like the depiction of all the different challenges that they have to face in order to try to do this, because like the movie chronicles multiple attempts,
Yeah, I
right?
think it's like it takes her 5 or 6 to
Yeah,
finally do.
something like that. Yeah, and so that stuff is all interesting too, but it is really just a fascinating dynamic between these two characters. One, Annette Bening is great in this. I can't think of a movie I've liked her more in, and I like Annette Bening. But she plays Diana Nyad um, as like it's a character study. It's not just this true life sports story, but it's kind of a character study of what kind of person does it take to extend the boundaries of human capability this way.
Yeah.
A normal person, it is so hard that a normal person, a sensible person, you might say, would give up long before she does. But as a result of her refusal to give up, she accomplishes something that nobody else has ever done before.
But what, and the other thing that I would add that I really like about this story
Mm-hmm.
is yes, she accomplishes it through her like absolute persistence and
Mm-hmm.
resilience, but this cannot be done
Right.
without all of the people who supported her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
that, yeah, that team thing of it was
Mm-hmm.
like that was sort of unexpected, right? Like for
Right.
such a solo achievement
Mm-hmm. Well,
to
because the
have
thing
like,
is, like, I didn't know anything about this sort of category of record or anything, because like what count, like they talk about like unaided swim, like she decides with her new attempts that she's not going to have the special boat cage. um
shark
be,
cage.
yeah, well, because but I mean it was attached to the boat. That's all I'm just
Right.
describing, is like it's not
Yeah.
like what people think of as a shark cage. It was big enough for her to be like free swimming inside it.
Right.
But like she was saying, she didn't want to do that because that would count as like an unaided swim. But even what she does do, because it's literally 5 days of continuous swimming in the water, and so it's like they still have the like them all these ships like following her along. They have special things that they're using to keep sharks away from her. They have to invent a thing to keep jellyfish off of her face,
Yep.
because the jellyfish, she gets a jellyfish on her face. And
Yeah.
and doing all of this and like squeezing liquid nutrients into her every 90 minutes and just making sure she doesn't, like, they're tracking all the currents so that she knows which ways to go, and knows like if a storm's coming in, they can tell her all this stuff, but like they're not allowed to touch her though. And so just like the rules of like, oh, they can squeeze nutrient goop into her mouth, but they can't touch her. And
Right.
like it's interesting how they define the rules like that. And like one of the big finishes at the end is like the rule is she has to get to where both of her ankles are out of the water. That's how they've decided to draw the line.
Yep.
And so it is kind of interesting just to see all the little quirks of that particular type of, because like it's not even really a sport at that point. It's like a record breaking attempt.
Right, which is that's where it comes. That's how
Mm-hmm.
record breaking attempts, like they have those weird rules, but it shows it in such an extreme, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how silly is this? Like she made it to Florida, right?
Mm-hmm.
But nope, she didn't make it to Florida until her ankles are out, right?
Mm-hmm.
She cannot be helped
Yeah.
from ankles in, standing on the beach of Florida to ankles out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even just the way like the team, like obviously there's the actual part of the team of like, the kind of gruff boat captain who just sort of like, it's like, well, you can't do it without me, but I'm going to be here for you. That's
Mm-hmm.
the Rise of Fonz character. And,
Yeah.
well, those guys were idiots with the current. That's why you
Mm-hmm.
got in trouble. You got to pay
Right.
attention to me. And then, like you said, like she gets the jellyfish on her face. And so you have to create the jellyfish thing.
Mm-hmm.
But then, even as she's getting like to the end of it, they finally have solved for all of this. And like Key West is getting there, and like
Mm-hmm.
she's starting to hallucinate
Mm-hmm.
all this stuff, and like the way that like, and then the sharks, there's a part where a shark gets kind of close and they're not
Mm-hmm.
sure how to get rid of it, and like,
Yeah,
so
their little electromagnetic signal that's supposed to keep them away temporarily malfunctions, and
right, so people are jumping in the water to scare the shark away, people are jumping in the water to like cheer
mm-hmm.
her on, like show her the lights, like
Mm-hmm.
cheer her on, like just the way they rally around her,
Mm-hmm.
even though she's the one doing it,
Yeah.
like that part was really fun for me to
Mm-hmm.
watch, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I agree, and I also really liked that, as much as it's about this, Diana Nyad having to be this person, this obsessive, monomaniacal person, in order to do all of this, and yet at the same time needing the team, right? And it's not like she doesn't recognize she needs the team. But
yeah,
at the same time, there's an element to which her friend Bonnie is having to consider. She seems really determined to do this thing that might well be impossible. And even if it's not impossible, still has so many different ways it could kill her.
yes,
Am I being a good friend by enabling this, or should I be trying to talk her out of it?
right,
And not only that, but even separate from whether it's okay to encourage her to keep doing it, there's just the fact that her own separate person, and she's having to give up months of her time and a lot of money in order to continue to support her with these repeated attempts, right? And so it's like, it is obviously Diana Nyad is the one in the water. It's obviously hard for her, but everyone else is having to give a lot as well. And when she is like so determined, she wants to keep trying, even when all these things keep going wrong, like it starts putting a drain on everybody else too. And
yep,
there's even a while there where it looks like she's gonna see if she can assemble a team of people who don't know what they're doing, because she can't get the people who know what they're doing to support her. And that, it's just like we see that not go very far, because she recognizes, I think, pretty quickly how disastrous that could go.
yes, and her friends are also obviously there for her
Yeah.
too,
Mm-hmm.
very quickly once they realize she's not being talked out of it.
Yeah, like she's gonna do it without us and probably die. Or she's gonna
So
try it and fail.
yeah, so we should probably be
Yeah.
there for her.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and so I really liked this movie. I think both Annette Bening and Jodie Foster are fantastic in it. It's nice to see a movie in this genre, like kind of the real life sports docudrama, or what, I guess not a docudrama, but it's based on a real story. But it's like, but with two women as the leads. and
Hmm.
the only male character is supporting at best. Um, and like I guess you have like the nurse who comes in later too, right? But I just mean the point is that it's focused on them, and I really liked it.
Yeah, the last thing I would say that I think that I really did enjoy also about this movie was I really thought it hit the very nuanced, like the flashback aspect, right? Like, so they're trying to like, because you talked about like they're trying to show like what makes a person want to do this,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it never says like, hey, we're going to show you some stuff from her childhood and that's why she's this, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't ever draw that connection. It's just like it does very much say like there is probably like she's probably genetically like hardwired to want to do this. But hey, by the way, the reason it's like so far over, like, is there's these other things that happen with her
Mm-hmm.
dad and with the abuse of her swim coach that, you know, she's like have just sort of clicked it into this next gear,
Mm-hmm.
but it leaves it very like people are complex, not she's doing it because she was molested
Right.
as a child,
Yeah. Well,
right?
it's almost not like I felt like it wasn't even framed as like necessarily having anything to do with why she's doing it so much as spending that much time in the water without anything else to occupy your mind. All sorts of things flash through your life. And so I feel like the movie isn't necessarily saying like she's doing it because of that. However,
I
well, yeah,
agree.
I know you're not saying that either.
Yeah.
But my point just being that it's an association that she can't entirely shake, and the endurance trial of the ordeal is so much that it's part of what is in her head when she's trying to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the movie also does a very good job of, as it's not nearly the same, but like I've trained for like a marathon before, and something that's like often forgotten. Like, yes, the challenge of the marathon is hard, but the hours you gotta log to like be ready for it
Mm-hmm.
is like that's a whole different thing. And like and it does a great job of just like showing her just like the just back and forth in the pool. And like there's a whole mental thing with that, right? Like outside, like just to get ready to do this thing,
Mm-hmm.
not even to do the thing is like a whole. And that's where a lot of these things happen, right? Like
It's a tiny beat, but I liked the running gag of every time she's home and training, she's just taking over a lane of the pool, and people are like, "When is she going to be done?" It's like, no.
not gonna be done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought this was good,
Hey,
and this was such an example of what we always talk about being great with these marathons. Is it's a movie that I probably would never have watched without the marathon.
yeah, I don't know that even knowing that like I'm in this like swim community, I'm like all there's a lot of things about this movie that like relate to me. Like
Mm-hmm.
I swim, my family's Cuban, like this is an interesting all this stuff is interesting to me. I don't know that I ever would have come across or like turned this movie on had I not been just kind of looking for something, the night I was looking for, I was like, I just want something kind of offbeat, like just something
Mm-hmm.
just and I saw this and I was like, man, this looks exactly like what I want to watch right now. And it absolutely delivered as you've seen. And you only watched it because I watched it,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I do like Jodie Foster, so it's like when I saw you watched it, I was like, "Oh right, yeah, that one's got Jodie Foster in it. I like her." Yeah, so.
Right, but
Mm-hmm.
the point
But
was that
yes,
yeah, it just sort of it was like a weird way that we
of the
kind of
various
and
different movies I could have watched, like the reason I chose that one is because you had watched it, so we could talk about it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and we were both ended up being
Mm-hmm.
satisfied with our choice. So I think
Yes.
that was a fun part in different to the movie. That was a
Mm-hmm.
fun part of
Yeah.
doing this.
All right. Cool. So, are we ready to move on to our next? Let's see. I'm looking, scrolling down the, trying to remember what other. Oh,
It's
probably
possible.
Society. Hmm?
Oh, Society of the Snow might be first.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
before.
Society of the Snow is the next one scrolling down our list. So using that to determine the order, the Society of the Snow or Society of the Snow. Knowing where the definite article goes in that title, you could imagine it like could be the Society of Snow, Society of the Snow, the Society of the Snow, but no, Society of the Snow. It's important that we went through all that. But this is a movie nominated for Best International Feature Film from Spain, and it's about it is another movie based on the soccer team whose plane crashed in the Andes, and they had to survive for a long time in a harsh winter landscape. And part of the reason that the story is notorious is because, of course, they were forced to resort to cannibalism, which is how most people know the story. What made you decide to choose that one to watch?
Again, I was looking for something a little different. I wanted to, I was looking at the documentaries and the foreign films, like
Mm-hmm.
something for just kind of that tone.
Mm-hmm.
And I came across this one. It's like, this has always been kind of an interesting story to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I, obviously, like, we grew up in mountain country and we know of the Donner Party and like
Yeah.
some of these things, like it's just sort of like the extremes the mountains can put on you that could lead to these things, or like sort of a lore in where we grew up. And like, so this
Mm-hmm.
was, obviously this takes place in South America, but it was always sort of a curious story to me. And what made me really want to do it is that I've watched the movie Alive, which is the American version
Mm-hmm.
that with American actors, and it it was always fine. I mean, it told the story,
Mm-hmm.
but for a movie about this event to reach like Oscar level, I was curious, like,
Mm-hmm.
what did they do that's different? Because this happened in the 70s and it's not a new story,
Right.
and we've done a 90s movie on it. Now we're 30 years removed from the last time we did a movie on it. What makes this like Oscar worthy?
Right. And I mentioned nominated for Best International Feature. It's also nominated for Best Makeup and Hairstyling.
Which, I mean, I think it does a great job with that. Yeah, with
Yeah.
the harshness of the mountain,
Mm-hmm.
which
Them
I
getting frost and malnutrition and injuries and frostbite and all of that stuff that they're doing with makeup and so on. It's,
right, because that's the true like crux of the story, is that like the cannibalism is a result of the extreme environment, right? It's not like we just decided to be cannibals and like we're weird, right? It's like there was so much pressure on them to survive that this became a thing that was just required. And so to show that through also the frostbite and the injuries and the death around them and like all of that, I thought that was critical to like understanding the story,
mm-hmm.
right? That these guys didn't just sit around and be like, yo, I'm hungry, you want to cook up our friends? Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's not what happened, right? So like, I, and I don't believe the 90s movie did it that
Mm-hmm.
way, but it never, I don't think it gave it the weight that this movie did.
Mm-hmm.
Where again, the cannibalism is almost like an afterthought of like, God, this was just a really terrible environment for these guys to be in, and the strength that it took them to survive this. Like, I feel like this movie really told that well. um
Uh,
I
I
did. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I agree. I will say that, like, when I realized what this movie was about, I think my first reaction was like, oh, I'm not sure I'm feeling a movie on that particular subject right now. And I watched it, and I it's not like it like the switch flipped in my head exactly, but it is a good movie, and it's certainly as good a movie as has ever been made of this subject, I think.
Yeah.
But one of the things that did really start winning me over to the way they're doing it here is not even the plane crash part itself, although that is certainly brutal and terrifying. But there is a point when the plane crash has happened and the action has kind of slowed to a stop. But before everyone's kind of. No, actually, this is when the crash is stopped and the people who have survived are kind of climbing out, and they're realizing that they're surrounded by all the people who died from the crash itself, and they're having to do something about it. And at this point, the movie starts showing the names of all the people who died in the crash, their names and ages printed on screen as they're dealing with the bodies. And all of a sudden, I was like, yeah, every time you hear about this story, it's always all about the people who survived and what they had to go through. But there were a lot more people involved in this that died, and this movie is very clearly intent on respecting and recognizing all of the victims of the whole thing. And I thought that was a really interesting choice that engaged me in a
Yep.
way that I hadn't been before that point. Like, not that I wasn't paying attention or something. I just mean, like, it was like I sort of sat up, was like, oh, okay, that's interesting.
No,
And
I agree. I think it did a very good job of honoring the victims as much as the survivors, right?
I really liked the through line of kind of discussing the fine line between, is this story a miracle that some people survived, or is it a tragedy that some people happened to survive? Right? Because once they're rescued, you have people saying, oh, the miracle survival story. And the people who are being rescued are like, kind of doesn't feel like a miracle. But but it's interesting, just the line there, right? How so often the things we call miracles require there to have been great suffering beforehand, right? And so I thought that was an interesting thematic line too. Although I will say, although this is perhaps a little bit glib for the movie that actually treats this very seriously, they waited way too long to start eating people. They let themselves get far more malnutrition than they needed to, and that was probably more people died than needed to because of that decision. Which, I'm not trying to judge them so much as I'm kind of saying, like, I would have been on team eat people sooner if I were there.
Which is fair. And I
Yeah.
think, but also this is another thing I think the movie does a good job of having as part of the story, but not dominating the story,
Mm-hmm.
is their different relationships with God and Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And like, they all are kind of on a different, like they're all faithful for the most
Mm-hmm.
part. I mean, they are,
Yeah.
but
They're from like a religious school or something, right? Like
yeah,
the
yeah,
team they're on.
they're
Yeah.
they're from a religious school, and so they have all that. Their rugby team is their religious high school or college or whatever they are. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so they all have that, but like the testing of their faith and their interpretation,
Mm-hmm.
how it means, is like a thing that exists, but like it's not the dominant story.
Right.
Like, so if it's not something you're interested in, like you don't have to lean into that part of
Mm-hmm.
it, but it is like for me, I was just kind of thinking about that, like, yeah, like that, what a way, like that kind of stuff like blows your world open. Like, what do you like? Do you question like why God put
Mm-hmm.
you here, or do you lean into that God gave you the strength to get through this? Like, these are very difficult things.
Yeah.
Again, it doesn't, it opens the door for you to think about that in this situation, but it's not heavy handed. I thought
Mm-hmm.
that was done really well as well.
Yeah. Well, and of course, like they go through and they, like, in character, they have all of these debates about this, because there are people who are putting forward this idea far before anyone actually does it, because there are a lot of people who are objecting, because certainly at this point in their survival, they are still hoping to be found, and no one wants to be the person who eats a dead body and then gets rescued an hour later,
Right.
right? Like that.
That might even been a quote. Yeah.
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 So that's a concern. And so the inflection point there is when they hear on the radio that the search has actually been called off, right? That is where people start to say, okay, well, like, we are all going to die unless this happens. But even still, it becomes a thing of like, well, isn't it a crime but also like they didn't give their consent, you know, like, because some people was like, what if it's like being an organ donor? It's like, well, but organ donors consent to being an organ donor. And then you have some people saying, well, if I die, you can eat me. And it's just a whole thing. But then there are also, even once you've made that decision, it becomes a question. It's like, okay, well, whose job is it to go like choose and cut and all of that stuff? And so you have like a couple of people who sort of volunteer to be the ones to do that part, and they do it kind of off to the side so that other people don't have to like come face to face, so to speak, with the, you know, the specifics of it.
Yeah, like who am I eating? What part
Right.
of them am I eating? Because these are all people that they knew, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, they did a very
Right. And you know, then you still have some people who are still saying they won't, but they're getting weaker and weaker, and you know, there's so much else going on, and it's just like there's so many different issues too, because of course that's a big part of the story, and it's certainly notable in this movie too. But this movie does also deal with a lot of the other stuff that they're having to face, like when there's an avalanche that comes down and floods the little wreckage of the plane with snow. Like when that happened, I couldn't believe it. I was just like, okay, what is that? How does any of them survive now? Like I just, but you know, like I guess that's kind of how it goes, because it's like it happens not even just once but twice. Like they're not even dug out from the first time yet, and it happens again. But I so there's a lot of you know, scary stuff with, you know, just depicting like the cold and, you know, the effects of the cold, but also the malnutrition. You know, they're getting sick. They're people who have injuries. You can't really treat them, and you know, you think they're not healing properly because they're malnutrition. You know, they're suffering from malnutrition, and malnourished is the word I was trying. Um, and then of course the eventual realization is like, you know, they climb way up on the slope and they realize no wonder they didn't find us. You hardly have to get any distance away and you can't even see the plane.
right.
It's just like they could have flown right overhead and not seen us, because it's hard to see the plane on this field of white. Um, and so they realize they're gonna you know, someone's gonna have to try to, you know, hike out. Yeah, so it's an intense movie, and I thought it was really well made. It does kind of a fake out with the voiceover, which I thought was an interesting choice. I'm not sure entirely how I feel about that. What did you think about that?
Which part I'm not sure I remember
The
what you're.
guy who's doing the voiceover for the movie is someone we assume survives, because how else would he be narrating in character, except that that's not what happened, and it's just part of the movie's conceit that this character who did die is doing the narration regardless.
That's right. Yeah, I obviously I didn't remember too much because I didn't even remember that was what you were
Mm-hmm.
talking about. Fake out.
Yeah. But like I have kind of mixed feelings about that, because on the one hand it's interesting because I was surprised when that character died for that reason, except that also like that surprise lasts 10 seconds, and then what? Right? You know
Right.
what I mean? It's like it doesn't doesn't upend the plot. It doesn't reveal anything new other than just like, oh, well, they could have picked any of them and they picked this guy, and I don't know. Well, I actually am curious though about how they chose which character to be the narrative voice in that way. Because like there's lots of people on that plane. Some of them did survive. You know, I wonder if maybe none of the real people would have kind of wanted to be in that role, and so I don't know. I don't know how they did that, or how they chose. Is my point.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Hmm. In any case, if you want to watch a movie about the endurance and brutality of a plane crash in the mountains, and the difficulties of surviving that experience, this is a good one of those. If you are faint of heart or of stomach, it might be a rough go.
True. I gotta shut these blinds. It's starting to get too intense
Okay.
over here.
Sure.
And I'm probably gonna feed my dogs while I'm up, so you can
Okay.
kind of move us along.
All right. Well, so we have covered 3 of the 5 movies that we're planning to target. So the next one, as we are scrolling down, is nominated for Best Original Score. John Williams. We are going to be talking about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And so this is a movie where we will probably, like, the only thing it's nominated for is the score. So we don't, you know, we're probably not going to spend too much time on just the score, because the score, you know, it's John Williams doing Indiana Jones. He's good. He writes good score. You know, and like, I think at a certain point, I don't know. I did not like listen to this score specifically to try to say, like, is this score deserving of an Oscar separate from whatever Indiana Jones themes that John Williams has written in the past? I don't know. I don't know that I even especially noticed. It's Indiana Jones music. It sounded right. So there you have it.
I agree.
So, and at a certain point, I've definitely heard people propose that John Williams should have just gotten a Lifetime Achievement Award a while back and then stopped getting nominations for each individual score. It's an interesting idea, because I don't know that they really, like, is that something that they do otherwise? I don't know. But in any case, I think probably our discussion of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is not necessarily going to hinge on the music, which is, as I mentioned, pretty standard Indiana Jones by John Williams music, by which I mean good, but also you know what it sounds like.
Sorry to leave you hanging there. Just
That's
the
all right.
dogs. I have 2 very hungry dogs.
Sure. So,
To the same point, though, I
mhm.
don't know that because of what this podcast is designed for, I don't know that we need to spend a ton of time on the movie itself, other than just sort of our general takeaways from it, because it's not
Well, it's,
actually nominated for anything other than score.
yeah, well, and even beyond that, I don't know that it is a particularly memorable or striking movie. Like, I thought it was fine.
It was fine.
Yeah. It is less uneven than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but in accomplishing that, it is minus both the low lows and the high highs. It's kind of just middle of the road. I think it does some interesting stuff with de-aging on Harrison Ford that actually looks pretty good, and I will give the movie
Guys,
some credit for conceiving multiple action sequences where Indiana Jones is either sitting down or lying down instead of having to run around and do active things that the 70-something Harrison Ford is less able to do now.
I think, but yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I went and saw it in the theater, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, all right. And you know, it's one of those things where it's like, it's not bad enough to be bad, but it's not also, it's neither is it, you know, good enough to be great. That was kind of my take on it.
Yeah, and one of the things I thought I remembered hearing this in the um like back when Crystal Skull came up, of like them trying to get like a new character to sort of be the rest of the franchise.
Right.
Honestly, I think they were trying to do that even all the way back in like Last Crusade, if River Phoenix hadn't, tragically passed.
Yeah. Like,
And
maybe
then,
they would have done more young Indiana Jones.
yes, like, well, I mean, I think they even started a TV show of
Right.
that. But I think that like the concept was going to be that like he could be a more like a young Indiana Jones that like did like all these prequels. And then they went to the whole like, okay, well, maybe we'll do one of his, like, we'll do Shia LaBeouf on his like, and I don't know if they're trying to do that here, but I wouldn't. I mean, I thought
Oh, with the the Phoebe Waller-Bridge
Phoebe
character.
Waller-Bridge. I
Yeah,
thought she was fine. Like
yeah, I
I
like
would,
her.
yeah,
I've liked her in other things she's been in. I thought
yeah,
she was fun in this.
yeah. If
Um,
they somehow found a way to do like spin-offs with her, like going on adventures, and they kind of tied it to the Indiana Jones franchise, like
yeah,
I would give it, if they did it a good job, like I would give it a watch. You
yeah.
know,
I wonder, like, I certainly like her, and pulpy adventure stories don't seem to go out of style, really. But that said, I wonder about letting the timeline continue to advance. It starts drifting away from the time periods we usually associate with these sorts of things, which isn't to say that it's impossible, but it does. You start encroaching on the modern world, But
but there could be some
yeah,
fun in it,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
it could be for sure.
if you
Yeah.
got,
So,
yeah, if you got the right writer and the right,
hmm
and and where I do think that this stuff could work is like you don't have to be as ambitious. Like you can go back to like original Indiana Jones, like which was I know, we know, he always said it was like, oh, I was supposed to shoot it like a B movie, you know, like just a B roll. And
hmm
yeah, yeah, but you
but
kind of
it's
put,
Spielberg's shooting it
yeah,
like a B
right.
movie.
You also wanted to make it blockbuster that looked like a
hmm
B movie, but it was less ambitious than some of the, like Indiana Jones sort of became a thing where like it kept having to get bigger and bigger,
hmm
right?
Yeah.
Maybe you can reset and go back to just that fun, like adventure pulpy
hmm
thing. So
Yeah. But it's one of those things where they kind of found themselves just in a they locked themselves into nobody really wants to see an Indiana Jones movie without Indiana Jones in it, right? And so even if you have a character who people like introduced in a movie with Indiana Jones in it, how many people are going to want to go and buy a ticket for a movie that doesn't have Indiana Jones in it anymore? I don't know. Like, do
yeah,
you still
I don't know.
brand it as an Indiana Jones story, right? Like, I mean, if he's not even in it, like I would bet that if they do one that like that, they could still have him be like a cameo in it. But at a certain point, then you start saying, well, what if Harrison Ford doesn't even want to show up for the cameo, or like eventually, if we lose him, they're gonna do just a CGI Indiana Jones. I don't know. So anyway, that's all beside the point because this movie is out and Indiana Jones is in it, and it's fine. I
Well,
know
that's why I
some.
went down this path, because the most interesting thing to me is could they do
Yeah,
something more from
yeah.
this? Because the movie is fine on its
hmm
own.
I saw some people say they didn't like the time travel, like that felt too sci-fi for comparing to previous entries that are more like the magic is more fantastical, and it's like, you know what, I don't, that's fine. I like time travel stories. That didn't bother me. I like Mads Mikkelsen, okay, even though like there's like his character is kind of nothing. You know what I mean? Like he wants the thing because he wants there to be Nazis again. But
That's I that time travel thing is still is weird to me, right?
mm-hmm,
Like you're drawing a weird line in like what you think is okay from a sci-fi, like God melts people's faces,
mm-hmm,
priests tear out hearts,
mm-hmm,
you know, the Holy Grail revives you from death,
mm-hmm. And also,
time
if you
travel
pick the wrong one, it kills you.
kills you
Mm-hmm.
instantly. And then if you, and
Yeah.
also all the God traps to get there. But
Then
time travel,
also aliens from
that's
another
too
dimension.
much. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Like it's just, and
But I guess I just sort of felt like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull opened that door already, so I didn't feel any
oh yeah.
further breach from
No, it's definitely not a further breach from that. But
yeah.
yeah.
Um, but it does raise the question, though. It's a little bit like later seasons of the X Files, where it stops making any sense for Scully to still be a skeptic. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like at a certain point when you have Indiana Jones in this movie, with all the stuff he's seen, still saying things like, it doesn't matter what you believe, but how hard you believe in it. Like, that's a line that sort of sounds good in the moment, but then, like, what kind of sense does that actually make? Very little. Like, what? What? So your explanation is that, like, everything's true if you're just really passionate about it? What are you trying to actually say here? I don't know. It's like, it sounds kind of just cryptic, but it's also the sort of line they would have given to a side character in previous movies.
Yep.
But yeah, so in any case, I don't know that I have a lot more to say about it. I liked it fine. I enjoyed watching it. I don't have any particular desire to rewatch it anytime soon. All right. Now, on the other hand, our last movie for our update tonight is nominated for Best Visual Effects and Best Sound. Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. Oh, I'm typing in the wrong thing. I was trying to change the title on our little video, and I was typing in the spreadsheet instead. So we have on this podcast previously talked through all of the Mission Impossible movies, with, but stopping with Fallout because that was all that had been out at the time. But we did our comparison to the James Bond franchise and talked a fair amount about Ethan Hunt and his friends and the various adventures that they have. But this is the new one. So I will start with the caveat that I am increasingly annoyed by the trend of having movies be part ones and not telling a complete story within their own runtime. I'm getting tired of that. There are movies that I really like doing that. So it's not to say that it can't be a good movie, but so often you sort of are left feeling like I can't fully evaluate how good the movie is because I don't know where the themes are going, because the story isn't finished yet.
Right.
It's a little bit like, as much as we look back on Empire Strikes Back now and think of it as great, part of that greatness comes from knowing how it turns out in Return of the Jedi, right? The things that Empire Strikes Back build to get satisfactory resolutions, whereas if they were left just hanging, like if we just never found out what was going to happen to Han, like, would we still feel the same? I don't know that we would, right?
Nope.
Like, and so it's left. So that's my caveat. I'm annoyed. I want movies to stop doing that. Figure it out. Tell, you know what? Like, even if you're going to do another one that's going to pick up the ball from where one leaves, I feel like it is important for a movie to try to come up with some degree of closure on its own ideas within the runtime. All that said, I think this one actually does that reasonably well. Like, obviously the entity is still out there, but we feel a little bit like an initial threat has been resolved, and and it is like, okay, now what? But it isn't like a cliffhanger. Whereas, for example, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, I also love that movie. I am annoyed that it ends on a cliffhanger. But that's me. What do you think of Dead Reckoning Part 1 in the Mission Impossible space?
So the thing I think I've just have grown to love about Mission Impossible is kind of what we were talking about. We were questioning like whether it could do it, right, with the Indiana Jones thing. Like, it has moved from what was cool and interesting in the night. Well, let's even go all the way back to the 60s and 70s. What was cool and interesting then, to when it rebooted in the TV as a TV show in the 80s or whatever, and then to when it became a movie in the 90s. Like, it has continued to reinvent itself on the same premise. And yes, it's been sort of helped by the fact that Tom Cruise is sort of ageable. Like he sort of de-ages himself.
Yeah, I,
You know,
I
like,
I will
yeah.
say I think he's still great. I will also say though, this is the first one where I felt like I was really starting to notice that he's getting older.
Yes.
Like,
I agree, but
what
plot
he's still
wise,
he's still great in it, but you see it. It's more visible now than it used to be.
yes. But that's like as we watch through those movies, one of the things that we just I don't think ever like talked about is that, the movies have always been on like the cutting edge of like what's cool and exciting and fun at like the time it comes out.
Hmm.
And like this movie does the same thing. Like it's got AI, it's got, you know,
Hmm.
the I mean, the fact that like again, like not to get too much into it, but like the fact that like the key is the cruciform, and there's sort of like this
Hmm.
balance between your soul and the AI soul and like all
Yeah.
that without being over. It's not
Hmm.
heavy-handed. It's just it's like it's there, right? And
Right.
the action is like just top notch to this level of like where things are right now without overuse of CGI. Like there
Hmm.
is enough of it. Like it has such a great balance of it. Like those are the parts that I really love about these movies. Is like they just kind of hit all of those. Which the funny thing is, what I realized when I was watching this with my wife is that she's never going to watch another Mission Impossible movie. Like she won't even go back to the other, but she doesn't even realize like that the other ones are different because like the way this thing comes at you, like it just gave her so much anxiety that she was like, this is not enjoyable to me.
Mm.
Like I don't want to see what happens. I don't want to be a part of what's happening. And I was like, I I don't feel that way, but like I definitely can see it,
Hmm.
right? Like it's just,
It's
like
action thriller. I mean, like it's trying
yeah,
to evoke that kind of suspense and anxiety, and not everyone wants that.
right. And just the way that those things happen nowadays with the way that they're done visually in a different way of like, yeah, I mean it's not for everybody.
Hmm.
And that's what I realized.
Yeah.
So, but
Um,
I like it,
yeah. I really like this one too. Uh, there is a significant plot beat. We've already mentioned that. We talk about spoilers on this show, so I'm gonna go ahead and mention it. I have complex feelings about the loss of Rebecca Ferguson as Ilsa Faust. She was, I've loved her since her character was introduced. I think she's great. I am very sad to see her go. That said, Rebecca Ferguson is getting tons of work right now, and she has previously said that she doesn't necessarily enjoy all of the physical action required in the Mission Impossible movies. So you know what? Like we don't have to feel bad about Rebecca Ferguson, the actress. She's doing fine. She's in the new Dune movies. She got her own Silo TV show. She's doing okay. But I
Yep.
do like the character, and I was sad to see the character die. However, part of what I think is interesting about what the movie is doing is, especially in all of the movies that have been done since Christopher McQuarrie took over, which is the last two before this one,
Hmm.
they have been building something that was drawn out of the previous ones. But we talked about this when when we went through these, is that as much as Ethan Hunt is the star, it's a little bit like Nyad, right? Like Ethan Hunt is the out front guy, but he needs his team.
Yep.
The team is critical. He could not do it without them. And that has become a thing for Ethan Hunt where repeatedly we have seen that he has kind of a pathological fear of losing anyone on his team. No one can be allowed to die. Is kind of like his ethos, right? Like in Fallout, he gives up the nuclear bombs to the terrorists in order to save Luther's life. And Angela Bassett gets mad because for that reason. Wait, it is Angela Bassett, isn't it? I'm suddenly second guessing that it's like Viola Davis or something. Shoot, I'm embarrassed now. Um,
I think it is, but I don't
I
want
I I
to.
think I'm right, but now I'm googling it just to be sure. But in any case, and I think it's fun to recognize that you can go all the way back to uh, it is Angela Bassett. I was right. Good. Whew. The you can go all the way back to the first Mission Impossible movie features him losing his whole team and being betrayed by the
Right.
guy he thought saw as a father figure. And so building from that into Ethan Hunt's whole thing of being obsessed with keeping his team safe and alive, even as they do these incredible things. And now what we're giving him is this artificial intelligence villain whose whole thing is that it can predict your actions, right? And the idea that it would be able to study him and recognize the way to really mess him up is to kill someone on his team. And then maneuvering him into that situation where not only does he lose someone on his team, but now he is forced to realize is like, the way that I want to react, is that just playing into the entity's hands, virtual though they may be, right? You know, it's like, is this exactly what it wants? You know, like the thing that seems like the smart play, has it already been two steps ahead where it knows that I'm going to do what seems like the smart play and it has prepared for that? Has it just prepared for everything that I might do? Like, that's kind of a scary villain concept that we have not had before.
Right.
And I think that's cool. And so even though I was sad to see Ilsa Faust go, um, still can be happy though that Haley Atwell shows up and she's great. I've
Yes.
loved her for a long time. She's, you know, Peggy Carter from the Marvel movies, and she had her own, you know, Agent Carter TV spinoff of that. And so I've like been a big fan of her for a long time, but she's wonderful in this.
Yeah, same concept. Like, I don't know that she could lead Mission Impossible, but
Mm.
like, I'd be curious if after these two, do they try to
Mm-hmm.
do something like? And again, like, can they back it off and like go back to like a little bit less where she doesn't have to be like Ethan Hunt, like climbing the tower in
Mm-hmm.
Qatar, or the, you know, like, can she just be more of like, and can they rebuild it? I just, I don't know.
Yeah.
Reason
Well,
I like, part of the reason I've been like wondering all this is like, I'm curious about this, but I see what's going on. Like, I've been reading a lot more, and when I go into the bookstores, like, I see like there's these things with these like authors who, like, characters, like they've never touched in 10 years, but it carries their names. Like,
oh,
and
yeah.
I know yeah, you can't do that in the movies. Like, it can't be like, oh, we'll just like keep putting like produced by Steven Spielberg, but it's like, how do you like keep reinventing like these
Mm-hmm.
concepts? But so
Yeah.
anyway,
But yeah, in any case, though, um, I feel like where we were kind of lukewarm on Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, I feel like this is another fantastic outing in a series that has become known for its consistent fantastic outings. You know,
yes,
like, people might have any number of reasons to like four better than five or six better than three or whatever, and everyone has their rankings, but like, they've pretty much just been rock solid since four, and then even one through three, like, you know, like, everyone can rank them however they want, but the point just being four, five, six, and now seven are just all fantastic and consistently great. And
yes.
yeah, you know, so I don't know that we have a new sequence to completely take the throne of the Burj Khalifa, in four, which I think is still in my books the number one action set piece of the whole franchise. But the train is pretty good. You know, it's
The train's pretty good. I've always liked the, I don't remember which one it's in, where he has to dive into the water thing and
yeah.
change out the
That
ships.
one
Like,
is in Rogue Nation.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a pretty good one. And I know that one has a lot more special. Well, I mean, I guess so does Khalifa. Like, has a lot of special effects. They all have
Yeah.
special
Well,
effects, but like,
so like, yeah, obviously in the Burj Khalifa, there, there's a lot of, he's got, safety ropes and harnesses and stuff like that, is preventing him from actually like falling to his death. He's not dependent on a fancy glove. But I was, but like that underwater sequence, there is effects added in the, like the robotic arms moving around and stuff, but he really did train himself to hold his breath for like 7 minutes or whatever it is,
That's,
because he's crazy.
yes, he is
As
crazy.
we have said many times on this show, Tom Cruise, super weirdo in real life, enjoyable to watch in movies, but
Yep.
subjective. But yeah, so Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1 is great. I'm gonna go see the next one. I'm not tired of these movies yet.
Correct.
All right. So, I think if that's all for that movie, do we want to touch on any like big predictions for, because the Oscars are coming up just on Sunday night?
Yep.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, myself included, are pretty sure that Oppenheimer's a lock for Best Picture. I just like, I don't even know what would be second at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I
Mm-hmm.
don't have any
I,
dispute to that. Yeah.
yeah, I don't put it at the top of my own personal ranking, but I did like it, and I certainly understand why it might win. I wouldn't be upset, right? Like I think that I kind of did some thinking about my own ranking this week, and I think Poor Things, The Holdovers, and American Fiction are kind of loosely tied as 1, 2, 3 for me. And then I think I might also put Killers of the Flower Moon ahead of Oppenheimer, but that's not to say that Oppenheimer is not great. I think it is great. I think it is. I think it's going to win. I'm not going to be mad about it, but I also think people should see The Holdovers, which is an extremely good, very conventional movie. I heard a podcast recently describe it as, I've seen this movie a million times before, but this is the best time.
Oh, like the concept of the movie?
Yeah, just like it's a very straightforward plot that has been done many times, but that's fine.
Yeah. That's a much more succinct way of and clever way of describing how we described it, I think.
Yeah.
So
And then Poor Things is super weird and strange, but I loved it. Um, People's mileage may vary there.
that's one I'm definitely interested in. It's
Mm-hmm.
been harder for me to find. Is that
I believe it's now on Disney Plus, but only just this week started. But I definitely think people should see it. American Fiction, I think, is also a lot of it. It is a lot of fun. If you watch the trailer, it makes it sound like it is all this literary satire, but that's really only like a third of the movie, and it's really also spends a lot of time on like family stuff, and it's really ultimately more like a character study of this guy than it is a broad literary satire. And it stars Jeffrey Wright, who's always great. When is he not great? He's always great.
Yeah.
And then Maestro, I think, has good parts, though they didn't really add up to a great total for me. Like, I thought it was just okay. And then Zone of Interest is... It's one of those movies, it's a little bit like what I was saying with Society of the Snow, where it's like... It's not a fun watch, for sure. In some respects, I feel like it probably is important that we keep making movies like this. You know what I mean? Because there's certainly a lot of anti-Semitism out there and Holocaust denial and that sort of thing. And so it probably is important to not let it just become something that is only in dry history books, right? But at the same time, I also kind of feel like I know that already. And but that said, you want a depiction of the banality of evil. Oh boy, that movie is like, it is intense and stomach turning, but at the same time, like, nothing happens on screen. It is powerful, but obviously people will have to decide for themselves if they're into that or not. And so I just kind of wanted to touch on the other Best Picture nominees that we hadn't talked about
I
yet.
think that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
All right, so between now and our next episode, the Oscars will happen. So we'll probably our next episode will be just a little bit of an Oscar wrap up before we decide on our next primary theme. So thanks everybody for listening and or watching, and we'll be back. So watch good movies.
watch good movies.